everything that's going on until you get your new building. Things that I have at my counter, 50% when the new building official gets it. County in Caroline, but very, they're all hiring her with her. You'll get those guys that sneak in. Public is I think 2 years. And my company comes in, issue them a license. There's a contract, business license. Second step, the permit contractors are not that if we're on the unless you get $8,000 annually, well, they're $5,000. The first $25,000, they're allowed up to. You can do something Lomanses and.
I printed a copy of King George control permit as a general. We don't. This is what they have a permit are required to be licensed. We'll go ahead and update their licenses. If dollars are out of town contractors, will fee until you determine how much you are. The deal about contractors is
back to the building set to take
higher the tax information. And we have that, and one ordinance is on our books. These are
contractors that I think it's great.
But I can tell you that we haven't always our fees, or if it's something various local not have enough money to pay for staff, we have no choice. We got to make that happen.
Concern responsible for a report.
I have licensed contractors, and we got them all.
You know, back if somebody's house needs to be windows and things like that.
A builder or inspection on an accessory structure back for failure. These are structural issues. So, jurisdiction, Steve, that it search for.
So, also have a list. They can get a pamphlet like this that says
all these things
in town that where this council and you can include.
I had a couple things. Group issue. One thing missed that.
And they're used cars when I reference issuing a building permit would be. Yeah, I agree.
Contractors like Colonial Beach that is not required to have a license is grass cutting only. The minute they start laying mulch and become a landscaper, they're a licensed contractor in the state of Virginia. So that, and there's a lot of our, you say speeding on 205, can you go out and give them a ticket? We enforce the law, period. And that's exactly what we need to be doing on this. Town licenses, occupational licenses, call them what you want, DPOR license.
It's a pickup truck or a bench license. Again, it goes.
Okay, and the third contractors and says, hey, those who have in town a business,
it's their license and insured, and we provide that to the consumer.
And businesses in the town, the realtors, we run local list Day through July, and there's been 8 say that okay, if we enforce 54, so on the education thing,
nothing but and it's a law and it's got to be done.
That I'm sure will be.
You fill out the complaint, I'm going to take you there. Tell you
well, I mean, if you're not looking for a complaint, let's say I'm getting ready to hire a builder or a contractor or something like that, and I want to see that if there's any pending deport
issues,
or if there have been past issues or whatever.
Yes, sir.
And I know that doesn't mean it doesn't always mean that the contractor's at fault. I know that things like that, but same with the Better Business Bureau. That. They don't get into nuts and bolts. They just tell you that they're ranked either high or low or whatever. So, but DPOR, is that
they had investigators, and it'll say he doesn't do, and they usually give them remedial training and a fine, and depending on how many number of times this guy's been reported, this business, pay the consumer up front because it's the only way to cut a hole in the side.
They have to have employed. They can complaints against radio class, or sometimes they, or if it's reestablished itself in different entities over the years, that's all listed in the SEC thing. When you go to DPOR, it tells you exactly also those same details associated with the name. So, just because you maybe go and look up a name of a person, the license might not be under their name; it may be under their company name. Or vice versa, you could look up a company name and there's not a license holder there. But when you find the license holder, you gotta check because he has to be designated to that company. Has to be.
And with that designation of the work, the classification that they're contracted to do. And like Steve said, the SCC and then the D4 sites, that's what those two clerks do in the Commissioner of Revenue's office in my jurisdiction. They spend 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week on issuing business licenses.
You know, and I recommended that we, put that on our website. Put it out there for people, let them know, along with the list of companies. But again, the licensing issue and the gross receipt tax issue is not solely a contractor thing. And that's what I think we've got to keep clear. We've got issues, of course, I think a lot of this came up with our vendor permit, our vendor licenses for the Bike Fest or some of our functions in town and so forth. And the bottom line is they're on our books right now, and until we change something or take it off, we are obligated to enforce it, period. Thank you. Kevin,
Thank you, Kevin.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.
Thank you. Old business, item 5 in the old business. New business, resolution number 25-18 authorizes the issuance of an RFP to demo the Potts building in tab B. I don't know that there's anything in tab. Just the resolution.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, ma'am.
if I could point out that there is no resolution from council necessary to issue an RFP.
Right. Correct. And did you want to discuss anything about, did you want to go over your outstanding items at this time? No. Okay.
No, I mean, I can't, I'm happy to
Well,
answer.
I guess what I'm asking is, we have several items that wouldn't require the council's approval for the town manager and administration
Correct.
to complete. Okay.
This is one of them.
Okay.
I understand that a concern was expressed about having a plan. That's really a decision for council. The town manager works for you, and you can either choose to let him do what he needs to do or provide more specific direction. But an RFP is something that is done at the staff level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Steve?
My point, I asked that question, and I think it was because in our last meeting, we said we were going to provide a plan and a financial analysis of the demolition, the construction of a parking lot, and this and that, and so forth, because there was nothing. And unless I missed the meeting totally, that's what we discussed at the last meeting. And I don't see how we go forward, whether or not it's something we decide to vote on RFP or not. I agree. I think it's the town managers. But on the flip side, I said we have not seen a plan of the use of the property, and that's what we had talked about getting in the last meeting, and that's all I thought was still missing.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Serby, it was actually part of the comprehensive plan. I believe you were absent during that time period. Not the last meeting. During the presentation of the comprehensive parking plan, it was detailed in there that we were going to demolish the Potts building, turn it into parking. I believe we were able to determine 12 to 14 parking spaces for public use, and the council approved the plan comprehensively.
Mr. Sir?
The comprehensive plan is a guide on how to use property. Okay, so let me finish.
Parking plan, not
Comprehensive plan, whether it's parking or not. This is the same issue that I raised on the Torrey Rec Center, Torrey Smith Rec Center. We have got, and the zoning administrator agreed with it. We have got to go in and do a proper plan instead of just saying we're going to turn something into parking. You know, we agreed that we were going to get a plan, something on a piece of paper, and a financial analysis of this specific piece of property in our last council meeting. That was agreed to.
I don't remember that.
Well, I know we don't have the minutes yet, but it was discussed because we made an issue of the fact. I asked the Public Works. He said, "No, there's nothing in writing." I said, "Well," and Bill Deller said he wanted a business plan, and everybody kept arguing a business plan and said, no, it was a financial analysis. Unless I was dreaming all this, this was discussed in our and
Okay. It's not
nobody
that.
in the town cares.
It's, at some point in time, there was a parking plan that was shown up on this thing here, was discussed, about that building property next to it's been purchased it, if the, and as why it's sat vacant or anywhere, all I think the lot cleaned up, let the people next to it, and, you know, this is from there.
Actually-
But, I mean, we're in a city, is it okay?
I want your staff member. We in the town, I just tear down the historically significant building behind the bank. I've been told that. I understand we're tearing down the jail. We've got a parking lot. Supposedly, I guess it's going to go in around the back, you know, as a continuation of maybe this plot. This is all just stuff that I hear, but I've never seen on a plan, and yet we're going to go ahead and issue RFPs for stuff, and it would sure like to, I think the town wants to know some of this. I was looking at one of the buildings down there with somebody the other day who was interested in putting a building on Hawthorne Street, or building business on Hawthorne Street, and they were asking me what, you know, and it backs up to the old jail building and all that kind of stuff, and they're asking me, what's going to happen? I'm like, I don't know. I know there's talk, but I've never seen a plan.
Again, before the staff interjects, there was a plan. It was a comprehensive parking plan. During your absence, and the funding for the demolition was going to come from the proceeds of the parking.
Comprehensive plan is not a plan.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
the
ma'am.
question that Mr. Serby is posing is a question for the council to decide. Do you want to provide more detailed direction to the town manager, or do you want to give the town manager the latitude to do what he needs to do and to work with staff to comply with the applicable laws and regulations?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Bill.
Real quick, I think in order to inform that decision, I'd like to clearly know what we discussed, Kathy, at the meeting in which we discussed the plan, and I don't think anything's going to happen between now and Wednesday when we have our meeting. If you could provide those specific notes for us or minutes to us, I think it would better inform our decision, and we can make it.
Let me just ask a basic question. The building's got to come down. The building's got to come down whether we decide to put a high-rise there. It doesn't matter. The building has to come down. The building is unsafe. It's an eyesore to the community there. It's been broken into several times. The windows are broken out. It's blight, essentially. The building needs to come down. We shouldn't hinder the process of taking the building down. Whether we build a parking lot or a car sales lot or a restaurant or anything else, that building is unsafe. It needs to come down. The town should not have to live, and the residents around there should not have to live with that building. And the new people who are building new opportunities for the town should not have to have that building sitting like that next to them. I feel like if the town manager has a process in place to have the building taken down, the building should come down. That's all. That's just my 2 cents.
Ed?
Steve?
I agree with what Ed said 100%. I do. The town manager, this is not a vote of council whether he issues an RFP or not. That's not the issue that I'm bringing up. The issue that I'm bringing up, and I think that we have to look at, not just on the Klotz thing, on every piece of town-owned property that we make any kind of change or use to, we need to make sure we know what it is we're doing, and the public needs to know what it is we're doing. That's the only point I'm making. If it's the Klotz building, if it's the Torrey Smith Park, if it's the community garden, I don't care, because every time we have a use, I mean, the community garden last year was a big ruckus. You know, it's everything like that. So I think that it needs to be made very clear what our intentions are with a piece of property. That's my issue. It's not whether Quinn has the right to issue an RFP or not. And it's not the fact that that building, I agree with you, the building needs torn down. It should have been done something with it years ago. But that, I want to make sure you understand, that's not my point. The point is we've got to properly think in detail about what we're doing with things and let the public know.
And that's the job of the town manager. That's his job.
Well then, but when we ask for that information, I expect it to be brought forward, and that's what we asked for in the last meeting, which will get confirmed when we get the minute. That's all I have. Thank you, Eddie. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, and again, if I can just be clear, just so that you all understand, The town manager is required to follow the direction of council that is made by formal action of the council, either an ordinance or a resolution.
Yeah, okay.
So it just, if you want that in the future, that would be the way to do it.
I would like that on every order that the town manager is provided, whether it's in this room or in another meeting.
Okay, so, I'm gonna ask for just a basic consensus. If there's any issue over here with any of you with that building being raised, being torn down.
Can't do anything with it till you tear the damn building down. I mean,
Mr. Wright?
No objection.
Mr. Dillon?
no.
Mr. Serby?
I have no objection to the building, but I think we've got to stop doing the cart before the horse thing, and we need to think about these items ahead of time a little bit.
Okay, thank you, council. With that, Mr. Robertson, I think you can proceed with the building being taken down. Okay, we move on to the next resolution is resolution 26-18, banners on Colonial Avenue. And that's tab C.
I think that's ready to move forward,
Okay,
Mr. Mayor.
yeah.
It's all been approved, just needs to be voted on at the next meeting.
Okay, awesome. And I know that, real quick, I know that this is something that they really want to move on. So I know Ms. Gunderson and the group is working really hard on doing that, so, okay.
So that'll be on Wednesdays.
Wednesday's agenda, yeah. Okay, the next is 27-18, authorizes town manager to execute an agreement with Westmoreland County. Mr. Robertson, would you like Mr. Robertson to talk about that real quick?
Yes, and I was able to reach out to council members about a week ago about this very thing. We received a letter on Tuesday, I don't have the date in front of me, Tuesday from the 911 dispatch agreement. I know council had discussed it in previous meetings. I believe that also council had certain members go down there and look at the opportunities if there was a chance to bring the dispatch back. It was my understanding that the overall conclusion was that that was not possible at the time due to financial constraints. The county has been in sparse communication in the last 2 months with us regarding the initial agreement, but we were told by Mr. Roberson that the agreement moving forward was going to be less than the one that we were currently in for dispatch. On a Tuesday, I received the paperwork from the county for the agreement to continue the 911 dispatch with the understanding it took council approval and they needed it signed before Friday. This was before July 1st, July 1st being on a Sunday. I was able to reach out to each council member, explain to them that there was no way we could have an emergency session within that time. Some members work in DC, et cetera, that this had already been discussed, and the initial plan and understanding was to move forward with it. Did anybody have an issue with it? I got a resounding yes by all. I think it was one, I don't know if I would call it an abstain, but I think Mr. Della pointed out that it would be good if we could just have it by 1 month. That was the only formal thing. I got a couple.
I believe that was Andrea.
Yes, it came from Andrea, and then I thought I saw an email from you.
I suggest an approval subject to town council review and approval.
Right.
A signature subject to town council.
Signature subject. Thanks for the clarification. So that being said, I went ahead and signed the agreement because it was out of all the council members. They said that they were willing to move forward. We don't really have an option B. Even a month from now, there's nothing that we can do to bring a dispatch back here. There is no alternate. We have to have dispatch. And it is in fact less on paper than our agreement that we wanted before July 1st. I can't remember the amount. I think it's about $20,000 or $30,000 less over time. Is that right, Mr. Rogers? I think that was about the ballpark. This is just to formally approve the agreement that I've already signed with the county for the dispatch, pending any questions or guidance.
I'm sorry, Quinn, I was reading something else.
No.
I I approve the signature as well. Again, we do have, every 6 months, we have an opportunity to opt out of that. We have nowhere to go. We're kind of hemmed in with this. And I believe the reason we saved some money, because I think the state, Westmoreland County went past a certain population, and when they did that, then the state gave more funds for an additional dispatcher in there, and I think that's how we ended up with the savings in money, which was spread across the county and the town. I think Mr. Roberson had mentioned that a long time ago, that he was afraid it wasn't going to happen, but I think in the end it did happen when the legislature finally passed all our stuff. So, you know, from my point of view of being involved in public safety for my whole career, it's integral to our safety and the safety of this town. How we got there, I'm not real fond of, obviously. I mean, you know, that kind of, what are you going to do? If your back's against the wall, you got to do something. Hopefully it'll work out in the long run. If it doesn't, then I was talking to Andrea. We'll seek counsel and do what we got to do. Legal counsel and do what we got to do. So,
If I can say something on this thing. First of all, this is the same treatment we received from the county a few months ago, around Christmas time, Mr. Mayor, when you were literally forced to sign an agreement for the new communications equipment. Last minute, you got to sign it or you're going to be kicked out. Same kind of treatment. They give us an agreement. They refer to attachment A. There's no attachment A attached. That's number one. They put in an estimated cost. I would much more prefer to see a not to exceed estimate. Say they can go anywhere up to that amount. That's not in here. We have before us a document requesting approval, yet there's been an approval already made. Where's that document? Why isn't that in here? And so you're really not asking for, in my opinion, and I'll defer to our legal counsel, but in essence, you're really not asking for our approval to sign it. You're asking for our ratification of a document that's already been signed. So, I mean, I think we should at least get the paperwork straight. You've already signed it and sent it down to the county. I think we should do our due diligence here and get it as right as we can get it before we ratify it. And that would be my only comment.
and I think moving forward, because it's renewable every, 3 years?
Yes.
Every 3 years, that we'll be ahead of it next time, knowing hopefully we'll catch it before July 1st. And we can, we can send a letter with some language in it saying, before we renew this 3 years from now, give us 60 days notice that it's going to become renewable. Real quick, not to digress, but I just want to bring it to your attention that it was brought to my attention that the town has a memorandum of intent with the people who purchased 10
North
Irving Street, which is next door to the Klotz Building. And in that, we agreed as a council, the Columbia Beach Town Council expresses its intent to demolish the building that is known as the Klotz Building, located at 6 North Irving Avenue, and to use the property as public parking so as to further support the restaurant at 10 North Irving Avenue. Okay, just
That's
so you
fine.
know.
Just the plans all we're talking.
I just want to make sure that we know that it was clear. Okay. All right. So we've already this has been done.
Yes.
So go ahead.
May I ask, Andrea, may I ask you a question? Should this not be a ratification, an after-the-fact approval by this council?
Has the town manager signed it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, then yes, it should be a ratification.
Okay.
All right. Any questions? Frank?
I know we said 3-year period, but it looks like it says it's a 5-year period is what the contract runs through. And then I know you mentioned that it says with every 6 months we could opt out, but it looks like it says with a 6-month notice, so we can do it at any time. We don't have to wait for every 6-month period.
Right, with 6 months notice, okay.
Yeah, so not a rolling period, but at any point for 6 months.
Okay. So, it's been signed. do we need to do anything with it here?
No,
We-
I'll correct the resolution for
Okay.
Wednesday.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, resolution 28-18 appoints Fletcher Lee to the planning commission. As you can see, the planning commission's recommended Fletcher Lee, and I believe he's here today as well. Is that you out there? Yeah. Nice to meet you. Thank you for signing up to support your town and work with your town officials. We don't have we didn't get your background, your resume. Yeah. So we can vote Wednesday.
Yes.
On this, and in the meantime, we'll get your resume, and then we'll vote on your application.
I have his resume, I did make a copy.
That's fine. Yeah, just get it to us
But if we do
electronically and in the packet for Wednesday, and we'll vote on Wednesday night for you. Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to call everyone's attention to the email that he sent Ms. Flanagan, and that's the reason he's here today, because he can't be here for our regular meeting.
Okay,
So
that's fine.
if anybody has any questions for him, they would
Okay.
ask now,
Very
since he's
good.
not going to be here on Wednesday.
Very good.
I do think that you've changed your bylaws to allow you to vote during a work session on planning commission matters that do not require a public hearing. So
Yeah,
you
we-
could vote to approve it today.
We can. I haven't seen his resume.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So I didn't
See
know.
it up
I
in
mean,
Oakland,
I'm unless there's something drastically outstanding on his resume that would negate him, I'm gonna vote yes for the gentleman from the planning commission, but, I don't know if the other members are prepared to do that as well,
Yeah,
so.
if I can,
Yeah.
Mr. Lee, would you like to come up and say something to us and tell us a little something about yourself?
Hi.
Hi.
As you know, my name's Fletcher Lee. I've lived in the town my whole life, so have the past 4 generations of my family. I graduated from Winter Bay Christian Academy last year, and I'm currently enrolled at Rappahannock Community College. And I saw that there were opening spots on the planning commission and thought I might join to do something for my town.
Thank you.
Steve?
I just would like to thank you for applying, and, you know, our past chairman, Robin Schick, you know, kind of came through this the same way. Born and raised down here, came up, provided fabulous input, and has moved her way on up to running for council. So welcome and stick it out. Stay in for a long time. You can't leave. We're not letting anybody resign from the chair.
It's Hotel California.
But thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of it. I plan to, unless again there's something I would have planned to support that as well, as Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Would you, it's council's discretion, would you like to vote today? Or would you
I'm fine with it.
You're fine today, okay, so go back to the resolution. Okay, so, resolution 28-18 to appoint Fletcher Lee to the planning commission. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Alger?
Aye.
Mr. Lyburn?
Aye.
Mr. Lehman?
Aye.
Mr. Serby?
I would pleasure.
Mr. Dowling?
Aye.
Mr. Rogers?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Congratulations, welcome aboard. Thank you. Okay. Next is tab F, which is discussion of amending zoning ordinance of accessory structures. I believe that before we get involved in this, I'd like to ask the council, if first the planning commission could take a look at this and bring us your recommendation first.
So what this is for the accessory structures is that it was brought to our attention to, actually by a commissioner, by Bob Christensen, as a suggestion to renew. But we need your direction in order to formally hold a public hearing and really redo it. So really, we just took his suggestion, we kind of as a consensus said, this seemed like a very reasonable thing to update and review and add. So we are looking, if you are also interested in us officially reviewing it and adding it, and you approve that, and then we will begin our more formal process.
Mr. Mayor, Ms. Schick is correct.
Okay.
And that would apply to the accessory structures, the next item on trees, as well as houseboats.
Okay.
Those items are on the agenda not for discussion on the merits of those topics, but whether or not to refer them to the Planning Commission for a recommendation.
And I believe our planning department also like for the planning commission to first look at those as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, but I am here if you have any questions
Okay.
now.
Is it clear why the first one is on there? I know why the other two are on there because they're new.
The accessory structures, it's not really entirely clear,
Okay.
and it should be fixed.
Okay.
Ms. Fincham and I met and talked about it. I don't know if you want to add, but it is not clear.
Okay.
That's the second issue under this tab. The first one is from the Planning Commission, as Ms. Schick was stating, and the second issue is an issue about clarifying the ordinance for accessory structures pertaining to dimensions and setbacks.
Right. So for council's sake, the way I understood it was there were some issues with folks who were building accessory structures that were almost the size of their permanent residence.
That's
on the same
correct.
piece of
That's
property.
issue number 2.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a basic question about accessory structures? Is that a separate kitchen, a whole separate living quarters separated from the main house?
No, I'm sorry. I should clarify that it's accessory apartments.
Accessory apartment.
Structures is different.
Okay. So is an accessory apartment, does that have a separate kitchen and a separate bath?
Correct.
And a separate entrance?
Correct.
All three. So it's partitioned off inside the house. There's no back and forth and that sort of thing.
It's not partitioned in the house, it's separate. It's a mother-in-law suite.
It's separate away from the
Yeah,
house.
see, like they build a garage and then they build an apartment above.
So an accessory apartment is an accessory structure or not?
It can be attached or detached, I believe.
It has to be detached. And the reason it's called an accessory structure is because it's on the same piece of property as a residence. If you took and built a garage on a separate property, if you say you own 2 lots and you build a garage on the lot next door with an apartment over it, that could be deemed a residence.
Right.
And still be owned on 2 lots. But accessory structure is on the same lot, but it is detached.
It is either by our code, accessory apartments, a complete and separate housekeeping unit within, attached to, or accessory to a single-family home.
Okay. So it can be either attached or detached?
That's correct.
Okay.
So I think what generated this though is if you drive around town, some folks have built that nice lot and they build a garage, and then they build a huge apartment on top of the garage, and they're utilizing that as rental space or whatever else. But the house, sometimes the actual accessory is close to being bigger than the residence itself, and I think we wanted to.
Well, we have code that explains how big the accessory structures can be, different types of accessory structures, and the clarity on that is, I think, what Allison is talking about.
Okay.
To clarify,
Yeah.
we have approved accessory dwellings or accessory apartments for many different zones within our zoning map already. They are already permissible in residential zones. This is something that happened, was a big push several years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And this specific ordinance that we're updating is the commercial residential zone. So are we going to, because they are already allowed in residential zones, would we not also allow them in a commercial residential zone, which to us made sense because we allow them in residential zones. So that's where the idea was brought up from Mr. Christensen, and then also this idea of.
That's probably where the emphasis came from, was the size of these things, not so much where they were located, but the fact that,
Well, so there's two different ways to talk about this. Is the zoning ordinance, it talks about where these things are located and which zone they're located in, and then the definition of that, of an accessory apartment can have more stringent size requirements. Maybe there's also a percentage, it has to be a certain percentage less than the dwelling. So we can review all that, but all you're doing today is just telling us to delve into it, because we really haven't talked about any of that yet.
Mr. Mayor,
yeah.
I just wanted to say that that's why I separated this with issue 1 and issue 2.
Yeah.
Ms. Schick has described both of them, but they are separated. One is for the classification, where they should be. Issue 2 is for the placement on the ground of for dimensions and setbacks.
Okay, Steve.
Just something that may very well tie into this some also. Several years ago, I think when Gary Mitchell was here, we went through a process also about non-conforming need for people that need caregivers and ramps and things like that that were not necessarily able to be done in conformance with. So I would probably try to pull that information to make sure that we don't contradict ourselves, or if we need to update that at the same time we're looking at this.
That needs to be updated also, but we would also need a directive to update that.
They're kind of hand in hand, so we probably should be looking at them at the same time, I would think.
So
Mr. Mayor, there is a specific state code section on that.
That's right.
Okay. So for the council, then we'll move forward on tab F, G, and H, and those will be moved to the planning commission. Are you okay, Ms. Schick, with that?
Yes, that's.
For your review?
So we'll prepare a resolution referring those for Wednesday.
Okay. Can we add to it the caregiver need, or look, I don't know what the wording is, Allison could get you that, but I think we should add that to it so it's looked at the same time.
That was something Brendan had brought up that he had wanted to look at. He's been wanting to get it passed back to us, but that's really up to Al.
Okay. You get it on the agenda for Wednesday. Okay. Thank you. Next is next is on our agenda is discussion of draft agreement MOU with the Colonial Beach Foundation and Torrey Smith project. I'm going to say I don't know why we're as a council looking at this. I think that's something the town manager should handle, and if it runs into any issues, should bring it to the council's attention. That's just my suggestion on this. Is there anything that you have that's outstanding that means that council?
Mr. Mayor, no, I think it is a staff function and we should be able to handle it in-house.
Okay. Does the council have any issue with that at all?
I do have one question and issue. We shot some emails back and forth on this a while back, and that specifically is the grounds itself. Those grounds have a potential value, and as I recall, the discussion through emails that we had is how do we determine the value of that property, because that's going to be the town's, part of the town's contribution to this whole endeavor. So the question is, how do we price that out? Do we price it out and have it appraised as a park? Or do we price it out and have it appraised as residential? Or do we price it out and have it appraised at its highest and best use? My recommendation is that we have it appraised at its highest and best use, simply because all options are available to us to develop it. And despite that, we have decided to make it a park, a facility for the young folks. So
I can add to that too, and then we have a contract with the school, that when we sold that property, that is to go towards the construction costs of that school, which would be repayment to the town. So, you know, highest and best use is the fairest way to do that. So if it's, let's just hypothetically say it's 400,000, then that 400,000 comes out against the 765. That's part of the construction costs.
But from a practical standpoint, Mr. Mayor, and all, but from a practical standpoint, that's water under the bridge.
Yeah.
To the school, it really doesn't matter to them other than knowing the contribution, because all costs have already been covered.
That's my point. Is it wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't be fair to have it appraised as a park, park versus a commercial or residential property.
So, with that said, are we going to have an appraisal done? Is that the idea?
It was my understanding the appraisal was done and we have that number. So we should be able to just use the number that it's already appraised at.
Depending on what the appraisal was based on use on.
Yeah, it was based on residential lots. Robin, you remember how many lots were up there?
There are 14 lots total, but I think it's 12 lots that are.
There's 10 buildable
It's all,
lots.
it's in the memo I
Yeah,
prepared.
and that was the highest and best use assessed by Coldwell Banker. So I think the number you already have for the appraised value is the highest and best use
Well,
value.
the Coldwell Banker did a market analysis, and the aggregate amount of the market analysis for the 10 buildable lots was $574,000. Are we going to use that market analysis or not? I mean, or are we going to get an appraisal? I guess
Right.
it really doesn't matter, other than the fact that we want to have a fair recognition of the town's contribution to this project.
I guess from a legal standpoint, we've had all the other properties that we have sold or done other with appraised by a licensed appraiser, not a commercial market analysis. So probably I would think, to be fair and to keep it in line with what we've done in past practices, is to have an appraisal done. So.
Yeah, I would rather see you spend the money towards the implementation, but
I understand
yeah.
that, yeah. I mean, I guess, what do you think,
Can I make a
Andre?
comment?
From the standpoint, I don't know.
An appraiser uses exactly the same approach as a realtor uses in commercial
Okay.
market analysis.
I just don't want to get into, later on down the road, into some type of argument with people who could receive funding from this, that it could have been more or it could have been less. And we didn't use the same like-kind processes that we did with the other town-owned properties.
You know, if I may speak, I think the 574 is probably more than fair a value. I mean, we had marketed those properties at an aggregate value of 574. I think it's been on the market now for probably a year. We haven't gotten a single offer.
Correct.
So, if anything, this number is high, but that's okay.
Yeah, I agree. Fine. Okay. If the council agrees with that, then we'll just let the town manager continue on with his process. Any questions, Frank?
So that, whatever that number is, 5, whatever, 4, whatever, that's what we're gonna use to apply towards the school for that 765, 500.
Yeah, that's the push, yeah.
I mean, we can apply it, but there's really no need to apply it. The school's been made whole by the town, so.
It's just like Steve said, the financials of it, just, counting those.
Because there's a was that a resolution or an MOU that you wrote? MOU. So that would be part of the town property sold that would construction costs. So
The only you on that part of it was the percentage thing. We're talking about the whole thing on this one, right? So do we have one specific to that?
It just, I think the
The
way,
word
I
was
think
percentage. I just want to make sure that this covers it the way we're doing it, because I know the one memo understanding was the percentages to the school, fire department, and police department. This, we're talking about the total back to the school. So let's make sure the memo of understanding allows that to happen that way.
I believe that the memorandum of understanding stated that those properties specifically
Those specifically.
were 100% back to the school for purposes I think it was dated in June or July of 2014 between Mike and.
We have a resolution in front of us here entitled Resolution 5216 accepting water tower property.
Right.
And it says there, be it finally resolved that the net sales proceeds will be placed in the school's construction fund
Right.
until appropriated by the town council. So, I mean, this is just bookkeeping as far as at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So it was anticipated they would have sold a long time ago.
Yes.
Yes.
This room.
Okay, so we're just gonna continue on with what we're doing. Quinn? Okay. Next is, amending town code rental program.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
On that last
sure.
item. I was under the impression in the last meeting that you were working on a full process that you were gonna delineate to us
That's in the
about.
memo.
Okay, are you gonna go over that, or will you,
I was not planning to unless you have a question. I provided a memo to council kind of outlining some of the required steps.
right?
That was just for council's information as well as to assist the town manager.
In that memo, it says that we're to be directed to update the comprehensive plan to be specific about this project in the comp plan. Is that something that you would like planning commission to move forward with?
Not right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the only reason that I was asking this, Andrea, and I sent you the email before, is we've got a whole ton of backup here of old meeting minutes in this, and trying to go through and pull that out and tie it to your memo was a little overwhelming. I didn't know if you were gonna be able to short circuit that some for us or not.
I think I hit the highlights in the memo. I just wanted you to have all of the backup documentation in case you wanted to look at it.
Okay. Amending the town code rental program.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I might just
Sure.
introduce that topic. Ms. Fincham and I have been working together on a couple of items. The rental program is one of them. It's actually a rental inspection program.
Right.
I don't believe that a lot of attention has been paid to this. We are resurrecting it and reinvigorating it, and just wanted to let council know about that. And I will also be reviewing our current ordinance to see if it needs to be updated in terms of state law.
Okay, so there's nothing necessary for the council to do at this
Not
point?
at this time. It's informational.
Can I make a comment though, Eddie?
Sure.
Again, this is something that is on our books, that we are not enforcing and we are not administrating. It's on our books, it's a law, it's just another one of those issues. I hate to keep bringing that up, but I think it's important that we realize the priority of the issues. These aren't just general administrative issues.
I don't know if I'm out of order, council member, but I would ask that that ordinance include not just rental properties, but B&Bs, other forms of rental property.
Yes, sir. I think that's the intention, correct?
No.
No, that's not in there at all.
Okay.
There is a distinction, a clear distinction
Right.
between transient occupancy and this
And
program.
rental, yes.
Okay.
And we are only able to do what we're authorized to do by state law.
Okay.
And if Mr. Vaughn wants to look it up, it's in the state record.
Excuse me. Question, Eddie, can I ask a question on that? Andre, is there something in the Virginia legislature that's going through about Airbnb stuff now? Now that this has become such a hot thing, I believe there's some, whether or not it's something formally in front of the legislature or not, I know there seems to be some things going around about whether it's amending this or putting another section into the Virginia code about Airbnb and transient and short term and this and that.
Yes, sir.
Can you enlighten us on that?
There was legislation that was passed, and pursuant to that legislation, I prepared a draft ordinance, and I believe that was provided to you at the last work session for your consideration. Might have been the one before that.
Do we need to bring that forward?
Well, I mean, I think it's out there for council's consideration, and so I guess, you know, if you want to put it on another work session agenda.
Can I make a comment on that? This is where we keep losing things because they go off of the list. And if we could keep those items on old business or still open items or something, but we keep losing track of things that don't stay on some kind of an open item list.
Okay, I'm a little confused. I thought the intent initially of this whole thing was to look at the process of collecting taxes for people who own and operate cottages and Airbnbs.
Mr. Mayor, I think that's how it originated, but as a staff dove in, we understood that there was multiple facets of it, one being the Airbnb, one being a transient, then you have a long-term rental as well. So I think we're trying to dissect that at the moment.
And the way I understand it, the state of Virginia does not have a taxation of Airbnbs at this time. What they do is they allow it to each jurisdiction.
No, there it is. It's a transient, the state doesn't, the local
correct. Local
tax
can't.
does. And it's the transient occupancy tax.
Right.
And what the state law did that Mr. Serby is referencing is it allows localities to adopt an ordinance that requires the registration of those entities.
Okay. Right.
Which we haven't done, but it's something we may want to look into. I don't
But that is different than the rental inspection
That's
program.
correct. Which
Okay,
is-
gotcha. And the other issue we were talking about was turning homes into multiple occupancy as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
We're working on that as well.
okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
can I address you? The list that Mr. Serby is requesting, I have started a list so that it includes the planning commission's issues, and it's about a page long now.
Sure.
So that nothing drops off. So
Okay.
I'll be happy to include that in
Okay.
a future packet.
Terrific.
Or part of my report to, in my monthly report.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell.
I appreciate that, and I have a copy of the list for the zoning department, but I don't think it's specifically particular to just that department. I just think it's any items that we talk about. I hate to see it keep falling off the list. So we can do that for almost everything.
If council members have a request to bring something back, like if you're interested in the Airbnb ordinance, the way that that would be done is you would communicate with the clerk or with the town manager to ask that it be placed on the next agenda.
I understand that part. I'm talking about the thing that you already said that we did a resolution on, and that it's just sitting out there in limbo. Those are the items I'm talking about.
That's what I'm talking about. So if
You're talking about items that haven't come to a resolution.
No, sir. If something is on a work session agenda and you want to move forward with it, all that is required is a request from a council member to move it forward, either put it on a work session or as an action item. An agenda is designed to be the roadmap for running a meeting.
Thank you for that.
Well, no, because if you put a list of everything that had ever been on a prior agenda as your agenda, it would make it very difficult to get things done.
Either open items or old business, not it being a specific agenda item, but something that we can refer back to in general as items that are still on the table that are not necessarily part of the agenda.
Yeah, probably not necessarily part of the agenda, it's something we've talked about, and then maybe didn't even come to a resolution, but we've discussed about it and moved on. Call it pending items, call it a parking lot, call it whatever you want to call it.
Do you want the town manager to keep such a list?
Well, I think that probably, I hate to say this, but I think probably the clerk's
It actually would be a town manager function.
It is a town manager
Yes,
function.
If that's the council's desire, I would also like to bring up that in the past, we've had it on the previous agendas, multiple things, and we were told to take them off. So we used to do that, and then we were told to take them off. So I just want to make sure that we're not going back and forth.
So this body told you to take them off?
Case in point, with a lot of the planning commission stuff that was kind of hanging out there, as Mr. Serby kind of used that vernacular. At one point, it was requested that it was on there, and then it was also requested to be taken off. It's why is it on the agenda?
But it's fine to keep, what they're asking for now is kind of a separate list of pending items, not on the agenda, just a separate list.
I understand.
That's
So we're not
certainly
dropping
fine.
between the cracks.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been over a number of, sorry, Mr. Mayor. We've discussed a couple today, and we typically in every meeting discuss something that we remember we did something a few meetings back, but it's not on a list or anything. And I think this would help us with that issue.
I don't know how you could possibly keep track of it, because we just, you know.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
can I make a suggestion that, make it maybe an attachment or, appendix A, whatever, to the agenda, so that way it's its own separate document listed of anything that we've talked about that has not been finalized. And then just make that as its own separate page. It's not part of the actual agenda,
Right, yeah.
but it could be the last
It could be an
page
attachment
of
to the
the
staff
last.
report
Yeah.
for each department.
Just so that we know that,
Like
3
that.
months ago we talked about something.
I think Allison would probably end up attaching hers to her staff report for the meeting. Maybe that's where we put it, but just so that anything we've discussed under a different staff department, we're not losing track of it.
Yeah.
We were running a section for work session agendas called status items, where it was just items that were in the queue, but there maybe wasn't something coming up at this meeting, that it was still in the queue. So we could certainly go back, and do a status item section.
And maybe it's not issued at this meeting. Maybe it's something that we update and just email to the members on a weekly basis or something, so we can go through it and say, hey, we'd like to add this item to the agenda. Maybe it's that simple, but there's just no way to keep up with all this.
I agree. Okay.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, how do we resolve it?
Well, I think we're just gonna do an addendum to have a page that has,
My understanding is that the town manager is going to keep a running list of pending items and that it will be attached to the agenda as some sort of an appendix.
Staff report.
Thank you.
Eddie, you'll let us know, right, Quinn?
Yes.
Thank you.
okay, Cat K is Piers, Andrea.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The current status of the Pier leasing program, there's been some discussion about that we need a pier ordinance. We do not need a pier ordinance in order to lease the piers as council has indicated its intent to do so, which is like for a term of 5 years. To date, I've received one application, one complete application, and my direction from council was to kind of collect a couple of them so as to save on advertising costs. And so when we get a couple, I'll prepare an ad, we'll run the ad, and then council can authorize the leases.
I have a question there. I asked Kathleen for a copy of the lease agreement or lease application. She said it doesn't exist.
She doesn't have it yet.
And how can we be filling them out and submitting them when we don't have it? That was my point. I asked for it and we don't have it. So how are we
But there's
getting
an
the application
application.
filled out?
There's an application for a lease.
But what are the terms? If you don't have a lease agreement, how can somebody understand what the terms are that they're asking for? That was my question there. I've got various questions.
Well, the council had outlined the terms. You had indicated the rental amount.
Right.
And so the essential terms are the price and the length of time. And of course that it has to comply with the VMRC requirements and so on and so forth.
Did we pull out the old agenda? The old was in here. The attachment for the previous ordinance that was in here, not in here now. The previous ordinance you had.
I provided it, yes.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of go through that and see what items in that
It's in here.
we feel are important. Okay, I gave them to somebody.
It's all struck. It's all struck.
Yeah, that's what I thought was important.
It's when you deleted it.
Yeah, right now what we have is we have deleted an ordinance which deleted all insurance requirements, it deleted any spacing or size or zoning or this or that. So we basically have a total free-for-all for whatever somebody wants to submit.
No, sir.
We do, because there's nothing in our ordinances, zoning-wise, building-wise, or anything else, and we're relying on the VMRC, which is really not set our parameters. Let me finish with you. And when you do look on the state code under wharfs and this and that and everything else, we as a town, of course, are allowed to lease our property out, but we really have to, that is one of those things we're allowed to do. And as we said earlier, like one of these other ordinances, it's something that we've got to empower ourselves to do. Well, we eliminated our ordinance and we have nothing now. And I was riding around with the head of EMRC, Jeff Madden, 2 weeks ago, and I said, we don't have an ordinance. He said, well, how are you permitting piers? I said, I didn't know we were. And because right now we're supposedly still under licenses, is that correct?
I do not administer that, sir.
Well, I mean, we haven't put anything in place other than our intent is to lease piers, correct? So right now we're still under licenses, correct?
I would think so.
Okay, well, under the licenses, based on your letter of we're on the only permits that we can issue right now under the license agreement are repair permits, according to your memo.
That was not what the council had asked for. So regardless of what was written in the license, I don't know, was this license approved by the council as a resolution? I don't think it was.
Yes, it was. It was Resolution 1117. And I don't know how we made a decision on this without reviewing that resolution.
Yeah, okay. Well, I agree with that. And we have had a new pier constructed at 729 Irving Avenue. And I was under the impression from the council, and I thought and I'm sorry that I missed that in this, that we were not going to stop the process of a homeowner being able to build a pier or make remedies or add on to their piers while we dicked around with this process. So I think I was clear with that. I think we were clear with that.
I was under that understanding as well.
Can I read something to you from their memo, from Andre's memo? It says that, I was asked that this is an interim emergency measure that would allow property owners with piers to obtain permits for maintenance and piers. Because we were stuck in that piece of that area where homeowners were having trouble, first of all, after storm fixing their piers, and second of all, they needed some way of showing ownership to sell piers with properties if there was no lease. And that's what Andre did some searching to figure out what we could do while we resolved this, and came up with this, little bit of a bridge gap here. But it was literally, according to the memo, February 20th, 2017, for maintenance and repairs on an emergency basis while we were getting our ducks together on what we were going to do. And that's kind of my concern, is that this is where we've left it, and yet we've gone way beyond that, and we have nothing in place.
I'm not sure I understand what council's question is at this point about piers, but my understanding is that council has made it publicly known on more than one occasion that we are moving to permit residents to lease piers, that people should submit applications to the town, and that when I get a handful of them, like maybe around 10, that we will do a public hearing, and then leases will be approved by the council and executed. That's my understanding.
I think the problem, as I see it anyway, is that we had initially approved the licensing agreement through Resolution 1117. Mm-hmm. And that licensing agreement was to make repairs on existing piers. At that time, it did not contemplate the approval of new pier builds. In the interim, a new pier build has been approved by the town. And I guess the question is, should it have been approved? The first question, should it have been approved? And second question, if yes, is it this body's intention to just go ahead and continue to approve the build of new piers without a licensing agreement, a formal licensing agreement of some sort? And we don't have that.
And so, Mr. Deller, if I can answer can I answer the question? To say that we approved the pier is a collective term. There are several different pieces to a resident getting a pier. And I think what you mean by approval is the execution of the license agreement.
Approved by and I don't believe it was Quinn. I don't know when it was approved, to be quite frank. It was approved by the town manager, I presume, and the town manager approved it after looking at a whole bunch of some submissions that need to be done, a site plan, something by
VMRC,
everybody had
building
to
permit,
approve
all
it.
that.
And so the question is, the only thing we had that formally authorized the work on the piers in which the town owns a property in which the pier is attached to was our resolution 1117, which allowed for the repair and upgrade of docks. But it seems that in the interim, we've leaped beyond that to authorize the build of new piers. And I think we just went beyond what was originally intended.
And Mr. Teller,
I'd like to
since
speak
it,
real quick.
Can I clarify one thing? This is not a pier in general. This is a big picture. Basically, anything that's not a repair. And we've done, everybody keeps talking about this one pier. That's not the issue. When I was riding with VMRC through town, he was pointing out various permits that had been issued within the last year and a half, in town, by the town, on town-owned property that would fall either under the license or under a future lease agreement. And some of them were added boat lifts, some of them were this, some of them were that. So it's not a pier. This is a global picture. It's anything that requires a permit on a pier that is attached to a town leasehold or license or whatever. And the one problem I have is, so first of all, I want to clarify that. This has nothing to do with a pier on Irving Avenue. It has to do with the big picture of what we're doing. Second of all, I don't know how we would want to issue a permit to somebody unless we had a signed lease where they were guaranteeing they were going to pay for it, the lease and so forth. So we're from what I hear, we're issuing permits to piers that are eventually going to be leased, but we don't have a lease in place yet. The third thing that concerns me much so, and a lot of time and effort was put into the Pier Ordinance when it was originally written, I believe, in 1983. And it had, we have 50-foot wide lots in Colonial Beach. So what it did, it went to on a lot of the waterfront. It went to a lot of trouble to designate minimum distances between docks, maximum length, because by VMRC, we can actually go out way beyond what our Pier Ordinance had. And so it required insurance because the VMRC doesn't have an insurance requirement because theirs can be, whether it's a private riparian right pier or a town riparian right pier. So we had insurance requirements, we had all kinds of issues involved in our ordinance that I think still have a lot, they're still very pertinent and that we can't just totally disregard. I mean, it'd just be like issuing a building permit without a zoning ordinance. I mean, I don't know how we do it with that, and we'll have piers that are out there 20 feet apart.
Well, real quick, so just a little.
I have a comment.
A little.
You won't have piers 20 feet wide.
Mr.
VMRC has very strict guidelines on length, width, square
Mr.
footage.
Hang on a minute.
So he's wrong.
Thank you. Real quick, I just want to say, this process started back in like 2015. And it's now 2018, and we still don't have a functional system. Mm-hmm. So that's where the real problem lies. Absolutely. And here's what I have said all along since I've been the mayor, is it's not fair to punish the citizens of this town who want to make improvements to their property because we haven't gotten our act together and completed this process. So what happened with this particular pier at 729 Irving Avenue is it was brought to me at the last minute where their permitting process with VMRC and such was going to run out. They had already gone through a process. It had been approved by all the other people. It had been, I think, designed by whoever. And, that was signed a long time ago. I was acting town manager then, probably October, November, somewhere in that time frame. So I think it's going on a year, actually. So, but my point is, I apologize for signing. I truly thought when people built a new home, they wanted to build a pier. I was under the impression I know conversations in these council meetings that we were not going to slow up the progress of the citizens. That was something we did not want to do. And the license resolution I did not pay enough attention to that, and for that I apologize. But I still believe the council needs to lean forward in favor of the citizens as long as they're meeting all code requirements, permit requirements from the VMRC, Corps of Engineers, wetlands, and everyone else. And I believe most recently our town should give them a permit to do the work, which we had never been doing permits from the town.
When that ordinance was eliminated, the intent was to rewrite it to get rid of the lease as it is, and you can go back and look at it, Andrea. Because I was here that day, I argued at the public hearing that we could not eliminate a ordinance without replacing it on something that we already had 50 items in town that it governed. Because the minute you get rid of something, then you have nothing to control it, and people can cancel all their insurance, they can cancel everything because there's no requirements now. And let me finish, please. And that was, I don't know, 5 years ago maybe now at this point. And if you go through our meeting minutes, last council and the first year of our council here, we have said over and over again that we have got to get the Pier Ordinance straightened out. Now, what has happened, Eddie, is you got forced, just like Quinn got forced 2 weeks ago to sign the 911 thing on a Friday night, because somebody got to a deadline and we hadn't done our damn homework. We are the problem here. We are. We have not put an ordinance back in place or put the lease parameters in place so that they know what the heck to do with it. That's the whole nut that I'm trying to bring forward. That's what VMRC asked me. And we need to do that. And we can't ignore, I have taken my amended section out that scratched everything out. But if you would open it to your, everybody has one behind the tab. If you look at that, there are some very important issues. Insurance, all kinds of things against spacing or this and that I think we have to look at because they were important enough in 1983 and they were important enough until we eliminated this ordinance. And the only reason this ordinance was eliminated 4 years ago or whatever it was because we had never done the public hearings required to legally lease the piers. That was the purpose. Go back and look at the meeting minutes. It was not because what we had in the ordinance wasn't necessary, is my point. And I really think that we just can't avoid that. We got to get our act together and get this fixed so that it can be done right and we've got some controls. That's been my entire issue on this.
Mr. Mayor, at the time that we repealed our ordinance, part of the issue was that it conflicted with the requirements of the building code and VMRC in terms of piers. If insurance is a concern, we can add that in the lease. That's usually where insurance requirements are.
I'd like to, excuse me, Mr. Mayor. It absolutely does not contradict with VMRC. The only thing in the building code about it, and which we were missing, and Westmoreland County's been doing it, we haven't been doing it, is VMRC picks up from mean low water out, and contradict. It actually was more, it was tougher in VMRC, which we were allowed to do. I mean, you can get 250 feet, I think, with VMRC, and we had ours limited to 100 feet. And I think that those are some things that we just don't want to throw out the window. We want to redecide if, in fact, those are important to us or not. We're building a lot of piers on the bay and on the riverside, which I'm a voter. I'm all for it and stuff. But I just want to make sure that we don't get in some problems, because what we had also is that it's the extension of property lines that create riparian rights. Now, when you have a property owner, a lot of our lot lines are not perpendicular to the water, so you just can't build straight out. They actually come and cross each other. And we have there's a pier in town actually that the town issued a permit for 20 years ago that had to be given to the neighbor because it was actually built in his riparian right. And those are the types of things we have to be careful about when we approve these. And if we don't have anything in place that stipulates, okay, it's got to be within the extension of the property lines, if it's going to be owned, if it's going to be leased to the person across the street, which is what our intent is, we only want to lease to the property owner across the street, then we've got to make sure that it can be acknowledged as part of within his property. And if we eliminate the ordinances saying, extension of property line and, riparian, because it's literally, these are the town's riparian rights we're talking about now, not the property owner, the towns. And it's a bigger issue than simply just letting this stuff happen. And I have to caution that I think we've got to take a look at it, the items in it, and decide on them individually. You just can't, there's too many issues in it. You can't throw the whole thing out.
Okay. Can the planning department take a look at that?
It's not a planning function, sir.
Okay. All right. Here's one of the issues. When we talked about this prior, I went online and tried to find a like-kind community that did this, and I can't find it anywhere where they leased their public property for piers across a street, type of thing. I looked in Maryland and Virginia, just try to find some language and see how they do it.
But sir, the town leases property to people who have businesses, and we don't have an ordinance for that either. I mean, I understand Mr. Serby's concern about addressing certain issues, but that is done during the process. And
so we expect that would be generated in a public hearing then?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question? If you would you do me a favor and please go back in our files and pull up the information on why, whether planning commission or what have you, 1983 I think it was, what caused us to create and the exercise that we went through to create the ordinance to make sure that none of those issues are still important to us. Can we do that, please?
Is there a consensus of council for me to do that?
I think so.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bill, I hate to kill this, but I just want to drill down and make sure I understand what we're doing. Do we have a lease agreement developed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, we have a draft lease agreement.
Mm-hmm.
When will that?
But we don't as a town.
I'm trying to get to that.
Normally, it would go in the packet at the time that we have.
So will the council have an opportunity to review it ahead of time, so we're not making changes at the last minute?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you could share that with us sooner rather than later, we can take a look at it and comment on it. Is there a consensus for that?
I got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
And one other thing, Mr. Quinn, do we have any pending requests to build new piers that are attached to town property?
Yes, I've signed the VMRC. The way the process has been given to me is that the VMRC application is so long and arduous to go ahead and sign the VMRC license statement, which is not the town thing, if I understand that correctly. So I want to say that's 2, maybe 3 that I've had that process on.
Okay, going forward on that, if we're going to, if we have those pending or in the queue in some
I consider it in the queue regardless on the VMRC.
So if I could just clarify, how does the council propose we handle those new requests for new builds of piers that are attached to?
They should request a lease. And going forward, the lease should be in place before the additional regulation, the BMRC permits are required.
Yes. For the pump.
You can certainly indicate that it's fine, but in terms of approving a specific
Oh, I'm not talking about approving a specific lease. I'm talking about approving the draft lease form itself, so that it's got everything in there we think needs to be in there. It's got everything in there you think needs to be in there.
I'm going to do that.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Got it.
Will continues with their process, so that very well could have been what I signed.
It is.
It is. So.
And for everybody to understand, the reason that being is because it's town property, and that the owner of the property, which is the town manager acting, is the one that has to sign that permit. That the homeowner who lives across the street can't sign for that permit.
Correct.
And now, what we do still got to figure out probably a little bit is now the town's going to be asking for a building permit for construction on their property that I guess will somehow be in the name also of the person who's going to own the pier for the part that's landward of the Mevo water. So that's something we got to get a little better handle on. We probably need to talk to Westmoreland County because they have pier permit repairs, they have landward portions, they have this, that. They got all this stuff figured out, them in King George. And I'm not smart enough to not plagiarize. I'd rather use their stuff, and if we know it works.
Okay.
Just for,
Yeah,
for clarification purposes, just for me internally for the staff. So as I receive these pier permits moving forward, I should not sign the VMRC until we get the license?
Say that again?
Should I sign the VMRC paperwork?
Yeah, I disagree with that, because I don't think it's fair to hold up the process.
And I agree with the philosophy, but that's the part that I want to make sure I'm.
What we just said here and what Andrea said, which she's now left the room, is that we can't apply for the permit until we have the lease signed. That's what she said. So until we have a lease signed, which we can't do until we do a public hearing. Believe me, Eddie, I understand your point. It's dragging things out. That's nobody's fault but ours. But the bottom line is we've got to draw the line somewhere, and hopefully that'll force us to get our act together and get this straight. Andrea, while you left the room, can you did you say that we need to have our lease agreement signed before we approve a permit for a pier?
Yes, I think it would be logical that somebody would have a right to use the property before they make
actually
regulatory. Yes.
But
where'd Mr. Deller go?
The question was posed by the town manager, that he receives a VMRC application, right? And, you know, they usually take a long time anyway, so, and I'm just saying that. They take a long
3 to 6 months to get an approval.
Yeah, to get an approval. So now he cannot sign that. Is that what you're saying?
That would be my advice, yes.
Okay. Wow.
I think that by signing that someone could argue that then they have a vested right.
Absolutely.
And so I think they should have a legal right to utilize the property prior to requesting the permit.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So in the spirit of that, because I will have people coming in, can I get and also because we're in a public forum and we have YouTube, by when do we think we can have something that I can use as a thing to inform them?
We have an application.
They just
need to fill out an application for a pier lease.
Okay.
Does this function for repairs as well?
If it's a
No,
permit,
if they have a lease.
it's a repair also, because it's a VMRC permit.
Okay.
If I can clarify, this is for any VMRC permit because the landowner in these cases, is the town, is the only one who can sign. And if I did clarify a few things again with Jeff Madden, VMRC, if we have a landowner, Eddie, like at your pier, you can go out and do certain things within your footprint, replace a piling, put new boards on stringers, even actually put a boat lift in your mooring pilings without a VMRC permit if you own your own riparian rights, which you do. Now down on the waterfront, Urban Avenue, Monroe Bay Avenue, because the town owns that and it's not necessarily a riparian right to a homeowner who actually owns the dock.
Mr. Serby,
Let me finish.
I think it confuses the public though when you tell what you think people should do.
It's not what I think. You got to understand one thing. Excuse me, Andrea. I go and get the facts. There's one thing I don't do here is sit here and preach stuff that's not already confirmed. This was from the head of VMRC.
Okay.
Let me finish, and I just want to finish what I was getting at, Eddie, is that on the permitting aspects, on any town-connected piers, anything other than replacing a plank, is required to have a VMRC permit. Now, in Westmoreland Shores, if you were to go out in your pier, in your riparian rights, and need to replace a piling, you need a repair permit from the county, but nothing from VMRC. So there's a lot of ifs, ands, and buts on this, and we really need to put it together in a clear manner so that we're good with the state and we're also good with our own building codes. It's a very complex thing.
Mr. Mayor, if I could. So
And you
my
don't know
concern, Mr. Serby, is that on a number of topics, you have indicated what you believe the law to be and what you believe the process to be. And I'm not saying that you're not correct. What I'm saying is that I think that there needs to be clarity about what the town requires from the citizens and clarity about what the town's process is so that people know what they need to do and what they can expect. That's what I'm trying to say. I also think that to the extent that you may be telling people what they should or shouldn't do, that could potentially be a problem
Telling people
for
what
you.
they should or shouldn't do. I call the MRC just like anybody else does. That's it. I mean, the rules and stuff change all the time, and there's a lot of exceptions that a lot of these things don't pertain to. And
Yeah,
I
and
know,
that's why I'm saying what I'm saying. It's probably better for them to go straight to the state. That's all.
well, unfortunately, it's got to be our permit applicant, and because the town is the permit applier for better than half the piers in town, we are the ones who need to know what the hell we're doing, and we don't.
Can I make a recommendation, just to kind of hopefully help get a little more understanding? Can you and Quinn set up an appointment with BMRC and sit down and talk to Jeff Madden and just find out what they want us to do, how they want us to move forward? I would ask you to do this expeditiously so we can get this thing off the table. And I really don't want to, if we have folks coming to town who fall in love with this place and they spend a lot of money on property and they build a home or whatever, and they want to build a pier for their boats and their families to enjoy it, there's no reason why we should be holding that up.
Hey, I agree with you 100%. And honestly, I've been telling people who have come to me for piers in Colonial Beach that I can't get them a license yet because we have this moratorium still on in paper where all we were doing was repairs. So I agree 100% with you on that, and I would like to be a part of that meeting, please.
Mr. Mayor, there is no problem with respect to piers. Right now, the town is welcoming, soliciting, and accepting applications for leases for piers.
Okay.
I just want to dispel the notion that there's some problem. There is no problem. I think it's fine for staff to find out the VMRC requirements.
Yeah, I think it'd be good just to sit down with Mr. Madden, I know Jeff as well, and just spend some time with him and find out, what they do with other jurisdictions as well, these kind of things.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask Mr. Serby a question?
Sure.
This has nothing, leasing, that is a legal town attorney issue. Where I am confused is about an ordinance, because I think what I'm hearing is that an ordinance is needed not for the leasing, or wanted, not for the leasing part, but for other issues pertaining to planning and zoning. And I'll give you an example. For many years, I was the Director of Community Development and Zoning Administrator in Louisa County, and Lake Anna is in Louisa County. And in that county, Dominion, who owns the lake, there is an extensive shoreline agreement with Dominion. There are ordinances that are in the zoning ordinance pertaining to shoreline. Instead of being town property, as is our case, it is Dominion's property. And so Dominion came to the county and asked for this ordinance. And the reasoning is sort of what I'm hearing. And please, if I'm wrong about all this, I just need to know. If it has everything to do with leasing, then great, I'm out of it. But the reasoning is because of safety issues. Piers were being built too close to one another. And I understand exactly what you're talking about when you talk about the riparian rights and the continuation of the property lines. We used all of that in an ordinance to figure out where to place the piers. It was done. Dominion also approved their own regulations that mirrored the county's regulations, and so we were able to get a permit for approval of each of the piers that was built. I didn't work with BMRC. I have already had a conversation with them because I needed to understand how all that affected this, because it is a little bit of a different situation. So my question is this about what I think, which is the more of the safety and placement of the piers, and is that the desire for an ordinance so we know, staff knows where these piers are to be placed?
I think so.
Or is this about leasing?
I think it's,
Placement?
Andrea, if I can answer the question.
Mr. Mayor.
She asked me the question. We spoke a little earlier about accessory structures. You know, 3 feet off the property line, maximum square footage, this, that, and everything else. That was important to us, okay? This is to establish those just for piers. So when we're riding down Urban Avenue, you're allowed to have a T-head out the end of the pier. So if you put two piers too close together and you put the T-head out that's allowed by BMRC, they hit each other and boats can't get in. There's got to be some control, similar to at Lake Anna. Now, Lake Anna, of course, the bottom's owned by Dominion, whereas ours is owned by the state. Yes, to answer your question is absolutely yes. And that's what I'm talking about. I think the leasing part of it really should have been all we took out of the ordinance, I thought. Now, I want to just throw one more comment in on the ordinance. The other thing that we eliminated was the Shoreline maintenance agreement, which we have a number of, I don't know if 6, 8, 10, I'm not sure how many there are, but we have certain people on Monroe Bay Avenue who are assigned and obligated to a shoreline maintenance agreement, whereas they put riprap in and they have obligated themselves to the town to maintain that riprap and everything. We threw that out the window, or I shouldn't say we, the council threw that out the window when they eliminated the ordinance. So all the protections that we were obtaining from the Monroe Bay Avenue residents who signed up for the shoreline protection thing is gone also. And that we need to decide if we need to readdress that. I can show you certain areas where our right-of-way is in the water right now down there because we're losing the bank. And we are losing those shoreline management leases here as well that put the responsibility of it onto those people, and they took it upon themselves. They were happy to have it. So I think we got to look at that as well.
Thank you. I'll get together with the county attorney. Thank you.
Anything else on this, Frank?
I had something I wanted to say about 15 minutes ago, but it slowly have gotten away from that. But just going back to the point of where somebody said it takes 3 to 6 months to get the BMRC application and everything processed. And the idea of when do we get the lease agreement from the property owner across the street. And my thought is, obviously we should be getting the lease agreement prior to them signing off on that. And my thought process is you're not going to buy furniture for a house if you haven't purchased or leased the house out yet. So why are they going to start doing all the paperwork if they haven't already started the lease agreement?
Well, you wouldn't pay a lease agreement, a lease payment until the pier was approved and being started construction.
So I just want to make sure we understand
So
that.
we got to put in the lease agreement.
That's why you want to get the lease agreement first before they even waste your time doing all the other stuff.
Absolutely.
But signing the permit for the BMRC does not mean that BMRC is going to approve the.
That's correct.
No, but I believe that you are creating an argument for a vested right. And so, I think that in terms of Ms. Fincham's experience, I think that's very helpful. However, most of the piers that we're talking about are already in existence.
Yeah.
And in terms of when the application comes in, the safety distance, one of the issues in the past is that the area, what people were leasing, is not defined. So that's one of the things that we're trying to do now is define the area that they're actually leasing through the Bayshore, I think it's Bayshore Designs that does a lot of the plats. That really can be done on a staff level. We talked for years about trying to fix the ordinance and do different things and have one size fits all, and it ended up being very confusing and frustrating for the council and for the citizens. And in terms of the shoreline maintenance agreement, that was never being enforced. If that is something that the council wants to discuss, that could be put on the next work session agenda. What I'm trying to do in my repeated statements that we are moving forward is that there's so often the message that goes out to our citizens that, you know, council's spinning its wheels, council's not getting anywhere. I want to send the message that we have one application to lease a pier. And if people want to lease piers, please come to the town. Please fill out an application so that those citizens can move forward.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we're gonna preempt that by delivering yeah. Good.
But we do have shoreline maintenance agreements in place.
Yeah, and if I can, Mr. Mayor, with regard to shoreline maintenance agreements, I have not seen one, but I've been told that those agreements were in place for 30 years. I don't know if that resonates with anyone here or not, but I think it would behoove us to get a copy of one of those.
So this is an example, though, where council goes forward and then council goes backward. That whole conversation occurred, and I mean, I'm sure the clerk can pull it, but are we now going to hold up leasing piers for shoreline?
No, they're two separate things. No, I'm just bringing it up as an item here that was covered by our.
Well, nobody's going to want to sign an agreement to do shoreline maintenance if they have a lease.
Andrea, it's two different issues. If you look at the old ordinance, which we eliminated, it's two separate things. We probably eliminated the second half. It shouldn't have, really, because it didn't have anything to do with piers. It had to do with shoreline maintenance agreement. It's two issues.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
With this meeting that the town manager and the town attorney is going to have at the MRC, in addition to your request, which I fully back, and I think I can speak for everybody in that, but you know, we had people coming in to pay their leases with the former town manager, and she was sending them away.
Correct.
You know, we can sit up here and be on YouTube all day long, but I think we need to be proactive versus reactive and reach out to these folks and say, here's what we got in place. Let's get in here and fill out this paperwork. You know, let's get your money, because people will eventually quit coming to pay the bills when you won't take their money.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be proactive with it versus reactive and reach out to these people. We've already got, what'd you say, Steve, 50 piers? Somewhere around, how many piers do we have? Okay, so, you know, we shouldn't be sitting back at town hall waiting on them to come to us. We should be reaching out to them.
Yeah, I think that's what we'll propose, and we'll get that.
Yeah, well, we got to put something in place to do that, because right now we're still under a licensing agreement for permits for repairs only, and we've got to put something in place to move that forward for these people to come in and do exactly what you said, Al. And I agree with you 100%, but we got to put the tools in place.
We have the tools in place, and council made that decision. And Mr. Deller, if I could just say that, you know, it's very hard for staff, and I think the town manager and Ms. Fincham would agree, to prepare to respond to your request, because I got a question about 729 Irving. I answered that. A year ago, council decided to lease the piers. This was after council had decided to sell the piers. And now the issue of shoreline maintenance, which was repealed I don't know how many years ago and discussed then, now that's on the table. If council could focus what topics you want staff to address, we can be more helpful to you.
I only raised the issue of shoreline maintenance because in a conversation with one of my neighbors further down the road, he mentioned to me, listen, I have a lease with the town for shoreline maintenance that has a term of 30 years. And I frankly wasn't even aware of those agreements. I had seen the pier lease agreements. I have yet to see one of these shoreline maintenance agreements, but I'm going to get a copy of one. But I don't.
We have copies of it.
We have copies of it. Okay, but I'm more interested, I guess, in the term of individual. How many of them are there? Do we have all of them? I don't know. It seems to me in conversations we've had before, we don't have copies of all the pier lease agreements.
No, we don't.
That's why we couldn't administer them.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I think, and number one, this conversation absolutely has to take place because I'm being educated at the same time I'm being befuddled because there's so much going on. But in terms of the revenue capture and that documentation, I think I have a presentation towards the end of this meeting that actually might assist in that. That might be able to identify some of those things. So it's good that it came up, but I think that might be a place where we can address Mr. Deller's concern.
My concern, if I could just conclude, is that I think that the public gets the impression that staff don't know what they're doing. And most of the staff that I work with work very hard and very diligently and go above and beyond. But it's very hard to respond to a moving target.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I just like to remind everyone that if we had 44 leases, which I think was a number we had back in 2013 or 12, I was in a meeting here when it came up then. You know, out of that, half were not paying their lease. So it's, you know, in reality, it's a moot issue because we might have had a lease, but we were never effectively utilizing a lease. Some people were paying their yearly lease fee, and some people were not. And it was the town never went after to capture the money. That has nothing to do with this council, and barely anything to do with the council before us, because it happened that long ago. So this process was generated not to slow down progress or anything else in the town, or people building piers or anything else. It was generated to make it easier for our citizenry to make their payments, to either own their pier or lease the pier or license the pier. We've gone from ownership to leasing to license, and we decided several meetings ago to go back to leasing and not ownership. So that's where we stand right now. Now, whatever we got to do it and get it done quickly, because it does look bad, and so it does look bad, and it's our fault. It's the council's fault. But in the meantime, I don't think we've punished the people. Whatever we got to do to not do that, I think is necessary. And I think we have something in place right now that at least gives us some guideline to keep things moving forward. I don't think we have any new pier builds right now in the books.
Just signed a BMRC lease this week, BMRC paperwork, I should say.
Was it for a new build or for a repair?
I'll go back and look.
Electric?
I know there's a couple that are waiting. They're waiting in the wings to turn in for new piers.
Okay, well, see, so whatever we got to do, that's not just my 2 cents.
Can I make a recommendation? Yeah. Something we could do maybe at the work session would be to take this resolution, or this letter that we did in 2017, which turned into a resolution that said all we were going to do was permit emergency repairs, and expand upon it until we get the thing done. It allows, that way we got something in place.
Can we do that?
Because right now this says...
I don't know what...
So the current...
Mr. Mayor, so I have been, this is for council, I've been more active and more vocal in this meeting at the request of the mayor. What I'm trying to do is to help council understand its role and the town manager to understand its role and staff to know what we're supposed to do to support you. I don't mean to be impertinent, but some of what, and in fairness to council, there has been a void before we had a town manager, but we do now have a town manager. You pay him to make decisions and to bring recommendations to you. And so if you have individual suggestions, that really should be done privately so that it can be prepared and presented as a package to the council. And then that way, there's a message to the public that the town manager's doing his job, and then the council looks like you're doing your job. Rather than us sitting here on a Saturday morning trying to run the town by a committee.
Just along those lines, I mean, a council member is allowed to put forth a topic for resolution without going through the town manager, especially if it's something that has to come before council. I agree that if there's an administrative issue, and I talked to Allison yesterday, what I would love to see come back, which was very helpful in the past, was staff reports and staff recommendations on the issues. Because I believe, at least for my purposes, and I've been coming to these meetings since 2005, we're not getting the history on how we got to where we've got, and we end up going back and contradicting ourselves or not knowing what the actual purpose was or why we're where we're at. And the staff reports used to go through that, and they'd say, okay, this is where it left off. This is where we left it. This is what we got. These are our recommendations and or your options. That's, and like I said, Alice and I talked about that yesterday. We used to get those, and they were extremely helpful. Well, I used to sit in the audience.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mr. Serby. We can prepare a helpful staff report if we know exactly what the questions are.
I think that's the point. And, you know, when we ask for something to go on to an item that's an agenda item or something that has got to go before council, then I think we have to refer to staff, which is what we used to do. And, I mean, that's what we've got specialists for this. We're not the ones who are supposed to be figuring all this out.
Correct. And so if I agree with you.
Yeah, okay.
Tell you, I will say, this covered this is not just about a peer issue and stuff. This is kind of an umbrella thing, and I think it helped us purge a lot out here. I think we've got a lot of information on the table today, and it's not just about peer permits. It kind of enlightens us in a lot of areas.
Okay. If we can, I'd like to move on to tab L. I think this might help us along the way as well. I think there's a lot of tie into this with some other issues we discussed today. If I could, I'd ask the town manager to discuss table A, tab L for us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was able to meet with Adam Schaefer, one of our finance people, who went on I guess it was a treasurer's retreat, his annual thing that he goes to, and he was able to meet with an individual who represented the company Avenue, which is in front of you. He brought back the information to me. I made multiple phone calls and I got a presentation from them. And just to sum it up, because I know we're looking at 11 o'clock stop time, so I'll try to be a little brief. It's an organization and a company that is designed to go after lost revenue, period. What they do is they go into an organization such as Colonial Beach. They only work for governments, municipalities, and they identify, number one, how we're structured, what we're collecting, and then also what we're not collecting. And they go out and they actively pursue, not only digitally, but actually people in the town walking through, identifying people that might be working all the way down to gross sales receipts. They have a fantastic, impeccable record. What they do is, and how they make money is they come back and say, for every dollar I found, they get X percent. Well, I was able to get the percentage down to 20%. Typically, everything that I found to look at a counter to that is around 30 to 40%. The reason why I was able to broker such a good deal is because they have no footprint in Eastern Virginia. But I think more to the point is, and I think a lot of our discussions today, we recognize that there's things that we need to actively go after and pursue. And I think Mr. Dell and Mr. Serby and everybody here, we're all in philosophical agreement with that. But we also have to recognize the lack of bandwidth we have. We're a small entity, and we just do not have those assets in there. Case in point with the staff reports, I think it's a beautiful idea. It makes sense, but that's going to take hours. That's going to take hours for something that we just, for budgetary reasons, had to cut our staff and refocus our efforts on things that we have to do. This would fill a gap. This would fill our operational gap to go after these revenues and to be able to actualize those with no outlay from the town, so it doesn't hurt our budget. And I recommend moving forward with it. I was able to get this paperwork in front to Mr. Rogers and Mr. Alger earlier this week, and then obviously when it was sent out with the packet, just because it falls within Mr. Rogers' background and realm, and he has expertise in it, and Mr. Alger also has a lot to contribute to it as well. So I think with the limited time we have before 11 o'clock, I'd like to answer any questions or at least take notes so that we can push this forward come Wednesday.
Questions?
I think I get a presentation.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I think this would have dovetailed very well with Kevin's presentation this morning. Would have fit right in there. You know, the objective of Avenue's purpose is page 11 there, which kind of outlines what they've done for other municipalities, and they are a coast-to-coast operation here. With their successes, they've collected billions of dollars.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think we're all familiar with bill collectors, and some of them can be extremely aggressive, and sometimes that's what it takes to recover lost monies. And I know we don't have the personnel to, we go after money. We ask people politely, we occasionally legally go after them as well. But this is money we would recover otherwise. So from my point of view, I think it's good. I'm glad Phil and Frank had an opportunity to look over it. And I don't know what you have to say about it, what you thought of it.
I was curious if you glanced over it, I mean, it's a good option. Like Quinn said, we don't pay them if they don't find anything, so it's not like we're spending money and not getting results. If they find $100, they get 20, we get the other 80. So.
Yeah, so I'm happy with it. I mean, I think it's a win-win. You know, I'm sure some of the citizens aren't going to be real happy with it, but then we get a presentation. It's money owed. I think the town manager met with the folks and
I met with them. One's in Herndon and the other one's in South Carolina. What I have here is the presentation they were giving me. They gave me a PowerPoint, but this is actually more fluid and more detailed.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking at, trying to get a little more detail on the actual specific issues.
This was more detailed than the PowerPoint I received. But I'd also like to point out, and shame on me, I should have done it at the beginning, it's almost like a secondary audit, but just focused on revenue. And it's free. I welcome that. That's something that I think that we can use, and if we do use this corporation for 2 or 3 years, what we're also doing is we're conditioning the public with the peer discussion that we had. They hadn't paid it for years, and it kind of fell off, and allows us to kind of recondition the public to where this becomes a thing. And because it's that third eye coming in that doesn't know us as a town, they're going to say, what about this? And they've also gained a lot of experience in other municipalities we might have never thought of. So, I mean, I welcome the opportunity to have somebody scrutinize that.
I agree with that. I think, but a few things in here that aren't financial related that they represent, like checking license and stuff. Well, some of that's not going to return anything to them or to us. It's just a follow through on an ordinance or a law. So I was just trying to get an understanding of where they kind of get off and where we get on, because we're still going to have certain enforcement on our own, I believe, unless it sounds to me like they're only going after the items that have dollars associated with them, which I'm 100% behind.
Yeah.
But I don't want to miss the other part of it.
Right. No, and to your point, Mr. Sherby, what I think happens is in order for them to proactively and effectively go after those dollars, they have to understand our internal processes is going to be, which by default is like an internal audit on the revenue side, which did, absolutely.
Mr. Rogers.
Now, one thing that Kevin emphasized in his presentation is education. And on page 12, Abner says they're going to have taxpayer communication, taxpayer assistance, understanding how to, what their requirements are as taxpayers and so on. But, I think the key thing here is the education portion that they offer.
So this isn't something that requires a vote.
It will on Wednesday.
It will on Wednesday?
Because it's a consultant.
To move ahead with an agreement.
Just a couple of things from my perspective. I think this is the kind of initiative that I would applaud. I think it's a new way of looking at our process. It's a new way of collecting uncollectible or unknown revenues. Having said that, there are a couple of issues or questions that I do have, and I guess the first one is we have roughly $100,000 in uncollected property taxes. I think we kind of identify that every year, rough ballpark of about $100,000. We know that money is out there, and I guess the question is the process, would they be entitled to 20% of that they collect? Are they going to actually go after property taxes?
Since that's so specific, I would like to go back to the company and ask that directly, because it's not outlined in the presentation, but I'll ask that.
And an associated question with that is 20% of those uncollected revenues worth it to us? And what I mean by that is what has been our track history in collecting those revenues. And it seems to me that collecting property taxes is probably back due property taxes is one of the easiest things we could do. I mean, you see things in the paper all the time where people are being brought to the courthouse and all the rest to collect the property taxes. So I guess a question for Andrea, a question for you might be, how difficult is it for us to do that? And is it worth a 20% deduct in our collection to have someone else do it for us? And maybe that's a question to think about.
I don't know what we have outstanding, and so I would want to talk with the town manager.
It's
I
about
have an answer for you by
$100,000
Wednesday.
It typically is, and I feel comfortable enough to discuss that portion of it. It is about $100,000 a year typically. Because of some of the leadership changes within the last year, they've gotten behind on what they're able to do proactively go after. And eventually we do seem to become financially whole, not completely, but we kind of do get there. From the real estate. Now, I don't want to speak to property because I'm not as familiar to where that is. I would want to go back and ask Gladys. I would want to go out and ask Gladys about the property tax, but the real estate itself, I know that we typically over the course of time get whole.
I don't understand the difference between the real estate and the property tax.
Personal property.
Oh, personal
property. My apologies.
Okay.
Long terminology. So what I would like to do is go back to the company and ask that directly. My assumption is, the way I read the proposal, is that if they go after it, they find it, and they receive it, they get the 20%.
But we've already
Right,
found it, I guess.
I think what Mr. Diller is saying is that isn't it fairly easy for us to do? So I'll talk with the town manager and we'll get you an answer.
On that particular, like I said, with the
And we could exclude real estate tax.
Yeah.
Right,
That's
and
easy
that's
to
what I was getting to.
Yeah,
That's what I was
I don't think that that's going to be a showstopper if we say, hey, hands off this.
Yeah, I didn't see anything real estate.
No.
There's a license and tax compliance.
There's actually some state regulations on what you can do with collecting real estate tax, I believe. Especially
Yeah.
absolutely.
And Quinn, have you had an opportunity to touch base with any of the references?
I have not called the references, but if I looked at the references, quite frankly, they kind of speak for themselves. They're pretty simple.
Well, it's one thing to look at what they say, and quite another to maybe call some of these folks. They have points of contact and ask them, say, what did you get out of it? Was the squeeze worth the juice?
Sure.
And preferably a township of around our size, not something 10 times the size, but something, 300 to 500 people, something that fits us.
There was also, and you go through here, I mean, they made changes to town in a lot of places, but city they did a poor job of editing this for us. The statement was made that basically the services are free. That's not exactly true, because if you look on page 17, they state that for deficiencies otherwise collectible, but for which the town elects not to collect, and I'm not really sure what those would be, the town will notify Avenue of its election not to pursue or waive collection of said deficiencies. Avenue will be entitled to 1/2 of the fee Avenue would have been entitled, so that's 10%.
Yeah.
And so I just want us to be aware of that it's not going to always be free.
Yeah.
And the other thing, they also talk about additional consultant services. That would be very tempting to just go ahead and turn them on. They'll say, hey, we identified this, and we can look into this for you if you want us to. I would just take that out altogether and make it as clean as possible. My recommendation, I don't know how the rest of the council feels about it, but if it's not there, you can't use it.
So I would recommend that perhaps Mr. Deller get with the town manager. I don't think it's probably going to be ready to go on the Wednesday agenda. It sounds like we need to negotiate a little bit further. And let's take our time and do the due diligence.
Okay, and follow up to that, I was gonna get to this eventually, is, Andrea, you've got to, from a legal perspective, of course, look at this for us and make sure the services that they're providing are in fact, appropriate for a contractor or consultant to do, and beyond that, look at the language in here that may need to be tweaked, because this is their agreement, and their agreement's gonna be written to their benefit.
Yes, sir.
We good on that? Okay, awesome. Let's move to item seven, discussion items. What I would ask in the future is, I know in this particular case it was done, but just moving forward, if members of the council have discussion items that they'd like to have on the agenda, if you could just submit some kind of paperwork with it, like with the questions that you ask, so that people have time ahead of the meeting to do due diligence and look and see if they may have something to offer and could bring something with them as well.
I'd like to, that kind of goes the same with staff. Like, I would like to have this as well this week to look at for now.
Mr. Deller, you have a couple.
Yeah, a couple of items. The discussion on water and sewer system, if you recall, a couple of months ago, there was a discussion on the water system rate increase, and at that time there was some discussion on local, I guess, private companies who do a poor job, and I was challenged to find some positive articles. I've attempted to do that, but I don't want to discuss it here at this meeting. I want to give you folks time to review it. So if you would allow me to discuss it in more detail at the next work session, I would like to do that.
Perfect.
And we can make it actually, Kathy, if you could include those in the next work session's agenda along with the attachments ahead of time to make sure everybody has time to review it. The next thing was the discussion of the statutes. We've had a number of discussions on the statutes. Well, I take that back. We had a heated discussion on statutes at our last meeting. It's a very memorable discussion, and I'd just like to say, I don't know who's responsible, Quinn or the mayor or whoever is responsible for providing the statutes. They're in the back for everybody to see.
Take them out of the box.
Who they look like, I don't know. They don't look like anybody I know. But anyway, and we had discussions on these statutes prior to this. We had a discussion on the statutes June 20th. And so it's any citizen who thinks we're trying to hide something from you, or we're not. I mean, here they are. They are what they are. I think we've explained how we got there a number of times. What's really important is what we're going to do next. So,
if I could just elaborate on that just a tiny bit, because I'd like to. I have a stack of emails which everyone's welcome to look at if they want to. They were purchased. Those statues were actually procured sometime around 2012, 2013. And as far back as 2010, they were in conversation. They were delivered, I believe, to town in 2017. Somewhere June 2017. Again, they sat at 700 Colonial Avenue, and I'll reiterate again, I wasn't even aware of the things, and if you look through the emails, none of the council members, including the previous mayor, name was on any of this as well. The public can rest at ease that no one in this council had anything to do with the procurement, purchase, or anything other with those two statues back there. Some of this is actually pretty funny reading, quite frankly. And some of it's, in my opinion, is quite sad, actually, how they got where we were. But we have the statues right now, and we're not doing a statue case too much, but it looks like we're stuck with them for now until we can figure out whether to repurpose them or something like that, sell them, whatever. But we're stuck with them, so we're stuck.
Hey, can I ask a question just on the revitalization? we still, I assume, have the revolving revitalization account for, don't we, where it comes back, when it pays back in and you can loan it back out? My question is do we still have a revitalization board, and are we, if we don't, are we required to have it currently right now to administer the ongoing account?
I don't know. Here's the last thing I had to do with any of the downtown revitalization. Of course, that is, the plaza is still not the plaza as we originally intended.
That's almost a little different issue, isn't that one? Because of the VDOT.
So let me try to answer your question. The last time we were approached by who I think had something to do with this downtown thing, or what you're talking about, was when Alex from the Northern Neck Planning came up to sign off on the St. Mary's Church, the $10,000, and that was the last time that I've seen anybody from that organization, other than the meeting we had that Bill and us had with VDOT up here on the plaza. That had nothing to do with the church, but
and I believe CBD, the last little piece of CBD was incorporated into the plaza.
So the VDOT DHCD grant process is still operational. We're running out of time on the DHCD portion of it, but we're trying to hurry up and get that so we don't lose that money. As far as the downtown revitalization, I don't know, I haven't heard anything from any of those folks. Go ahead.
I mean, the last thing I heard, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, Steve, but there was something called a micro loan process where we would loan money out, get work done, and that money would then come back to us and we would reloan it. Is that the same thing?
Yeah, like right now, I'm familiar with Montrose, and even though the work and stuff was done on the facade renovation 5-6 years ago, the committee still exists because it's an ongoing process. And
would you like for the town manager to answer this question for you?
No, I just had one other question, because one reason I'm saying is does the committee exist? Because it's supposed to have, I believe, a member of council on it according to the bylaws of the thing. And
I'm not aware of any committee revitalization.
When we're in trouble.
Micro loans, do they ring a bell?
No.
Would you like for us to?
Yes.
Okay, we'll put it on the list.
It might be interesting to talk to some of the prior members who were on the committee. I think Val was on it, but there was other. I think the rest was all private citizens and maybe Mayor Ham.
There was a management team that I found reference to in some of these emails.
Because that's required.
I don't know if that's the same as what you're
part of the grant. It's please, Dr. Farney, you may go answer all this.
Well, why don't you let staff do it?
Hang on one sec, Kathy. Go ahead.
There's a resolution, the council appointed people to sit on these specific committees, and I'll be happy to pull it and I'll send it out.
Is that like Linda Torello and Maureen?
Yeah, there were maybe 4 or 5. I know Kelly DeJesus sat on several of the committees. There was a committee that gave facade, loans, and there was some other to eliminate blight was a really important part of that committee. Okay. So there were 2 financial committees that were appointed by council. I'll pull that resolution and I'll shoot it out because those people were appointed.
And it is a requirement of the administration of the grant. It has it outlined in that you've got to do these things. Do you have anything, Dr. Farney?
I can't really clarify a lot of it because I've forgotten a lot of it, but I have extensive note keeping. I am a member of that micro loan committee that was appointed by the revitalization committee, mostly by Val, and the revitalization committee turned out to be a citizen rubber stamp type of thing that was created by Val and Jerry Davis. But I have extensive notes on that, and I can get together with staff and bring them up to date.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, Dr. Farney. Is that okay? We okay with that then?
Yep.
Bill, next.
Okay, where was I? The discussion of town business licenses, staff picked that up on tab A, so that is a done deal. Discussion of peers, that was picked up by staff on tab K. The final thing is, I have here was discussion of 4th of July lessons learned.
Mr. Mayor. I understand that the lessons learned is something that we want to discuss, but it's always been my practice that lessons learned after action reviews and stuff like that are not only in staff, but it's also something that is not done in public forum. What I have done in preparation for today's meeting, after seeing it on the agenda, is I've prepared an after-action review report that I'm willing to hand out now to council so that they can digest and then come back to the town manager and staff with the recommendations and guidance.
Well, I got to tell you, that's fine. I mean, that's fine. I'm fine with everything you just. I mean, for God's sakes, we're up here to serve the public.
I think it can be disclosed to the public, but I think the council needs to digest the after-action report first.
Is that what you're suggesting?
And I will also tell you that having worked again in public safety in Dallas and anybody's been in the military, sometimes there are items that are not for public consumption.
I understand
whether
that.
you like it or not. So,
and if I'm not mistaken, those are handled in closed session.
Okay. So they're still open to the council.
They can be, yeah.
No.
But
They're not held in
there's
closed
law
session.
enforcement things and things about preparedness and things like that that we just can't share sometimes. So if it's okay with the council, Quinn can provide us with his outwash or after action report, and then we can readdress it. If you can go directly to Quinn with your questions, if that's okay, and then present it to the rest of us.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
That's fine. Okay, that's it for me.
Does the council feel a need for a closed meeting?
Mayor, make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Mr. Alley? Aye. Mr. Lehman?
Aye.
Mr. Surge?
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
Phil?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.